someone posts something and you think, oh my God, is that me? Is that about me? Someone doesn't return your text message. Wait, are they mad at me? Is it about me? Well, that's called taking things personal. And there's a deep rooted issue as to why you're taking things personal. So to understand it is always good because then you know where to start to fix it. So with that being said, let's jump into it so you can stop taking things so personally. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and man, am I excited that you're here. As I'm recording this, we're expecting some snow, all of a couple inches at best. So it's better than what we've been getting. I love the snow. It's one of my most favorite things about the winter and living up in the Northeast, because when I live in the Northeast and where I live, it is what they call Little America. And it's because you can get to the beach, you can get to the mountains. So you kind of get all four seasons. Sometimes you get them all four in the same day. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, and I'm really, really excited, like I said, that you're here. And on this journey, you know, on your healing journey, a big thing is taking things personal. And one of these things in here, by the way, is going to have its own podcast next week, because when I was doing all of the, you know, kind of all of the research, going back through and looking at some of my old notes and things like that, I was like, ooh, people really want to go deeper on this. And I'll tell you when we get there what it is. But you know that you're going to get a worksheet. So if you were on the Patreon, you're going to get a pretty detailed worksheet about taking things personal with examples and then kind of giving you a different reframe. So if that's your jam, you can hop right on over to Patreon and go to www.patreon.com/the positivity experience, or you can just click the link anywhere that you get this podcast. So with that being said, I'm going to sit here and try to fight with the cat, because every time I go into record mode, the cats go, it's time to walk across the screen. And yes, I'm not going to take that personal, because that's a cat thing. And it's very, very important to understand that when you're taking things personal, the world is not about you. It's hard for you to see past that. The world is not about you. It does not revolve around you. Now, your world should be a lot about you, right? Your world, you should know you should be your priority. You should know things that you need to take care of for yourself. You need to know your boundaries. Yes, for you, this is important. But let's talk into why you take things personal, because the reality is people are going to do actions because everybody is their own person, right? Everybody is their own person. Everybody is doing stuff based on what they need to do for them. And then you internalize that, right? So let's talk about it. One, of course, we know is insecurity, right? Total insecurity. So if someone gives you a form of criticism, okay, constructive criticism, let's say you're at work, okay? Let's just use work here for a second. You're at work and you did a presentation, okay? You had a presentation, you spent hours and days and weeks, and this goes into a little bit of the imposter syndrome that we talked about last week, where as you're like, oh my God, am I doing this enough? Like, you might already feel a little insecure about it. So afterwards, somebody comes up to you and says, oh my God, that was such a good presentation. I really enjoyed it. You know, I think in this one area, you didn't quite go deep enough. So in the next presentation, if you could elaborate more, very constructive, very, oh my God, great job. But hey, you know what? We always need to improve. If you think you have the answers to everything, that goes into this personal thing that we're going to talk about next week, which will be really good for you to hear as well. And, but you now suddenly go into this role of like, oh, well, great. I knew I sucked at it. I knew it. I knew it was going to be tough. Like, you've already breathed life into it because you were already through this whole presentation preparation. You were talking about how you're going to be stupid, how it doesn't going to sound right, all of these things. You breathe that right into existence, into the universe, right? So you think that you prepare yourself. You don't. You increase that. However, when you're in insecurity and someone gives you a level of criticism, not to be confused with control. So not your mom who goes, that's how you're going to make the bed. That is not how you make the bed. That is her stuff. That is not your stuff. That is not what I'm talking about. Criticism is literally what I just described. Okay. Or, you know, you start some new hobby. You start crochet. Like I said, you know, I'm going to use that, or pickleball is my two favorite things. So they're always going to be used as examples, but in either one, right? You know, you start crocheting, the edges aren't clear. Aren't straight. And then you say, how's this look? I say, great. except for, at the end, you got to make sure that you're counting or using stitch markers if you're new. And even if you're not new, stitch markers are great. And now you feel some kind of way about it. Well, that's your insecurity. So your lack of self-esteem and insecurity is going to be a big player here. So just because someone gives you criticism does not mean that they are attacking you, does not mean that you are not good enough. It is the perception in which you see the world through, right? And again, I got to tell you, people don't think about you nearly as much as you think they do, right? And if people spend all that time on, trying to smear you or on socials, trying to talk mad smack or just following you, and they don't really have the best interest in you, then that speaks volumes on them, not you. But there's zero reason to take those things personal. And again, if people are being passive aggressive and yeah, great presentation. Okay, they start doing that undertone, or they're not direct. And that's why you want to say, okay, well, could you please clarify what you're trying to say? That's right. You say that. Could you please clarify what you're trying to say? Because the problem is you're allowing the passive aggression to get to you. You need to just ask them, right? You don't have to be defensive. Just ask them, right? So number 1 is insecurity. Number 2 is what we're going to have next week. Because I was like, oh my God, the more and more that I went through some of my old notes and some of my old studies and then some of my old books and stuff like that, I was like, oh my God, this needs its own podcast. So we're only going to stay on here briefly because next week I'm going to expand on it. It's a personalization bias. Okay. You're like, you've heard of cognitive biases. You've heard of, you know what a bias is, right? Well, personalization bias. This is when you are thinking that things are always about you. Always. Somebody posts something on Facebook and it's kind of like a vague post and you already feel some kind of way because you didn't get invited with the girls to wine. Okay. And they post something about how keep your circle small, whatever it is. Well, you didn't go to wine. So now suddenly you think that that's about you and they're telling you that you're on the outer rim of that because now they're keeping their circle small. You've made that entire thing about you and it probably has nothing to do about you. And if it does, again, passive aggression, their issue, not yours. Okay. Extremely important. And that's all I'm going to say on that because next week it goes way deep. Ego goes into insecurity, goes into past history. So we're going to talk about that next week. And there's going to be a worksheet up there too. So like I said, as I was prepping this, I was like, oh God, I would spend 4 hours on this topic. So that's another thing is because you make everything about you. Like people are totally focused on you. And I promise you that they are not. And sometimes that's tough for you to hear, right? Because then you'll take that and swing in the other direction and be like, well, I know people don't care. Okay, that's catastrophizing. And we will talk about that too. And I talk about it a lot. So make sure that you go back and listen to some of the old podcasts and stuff. Fear of rejection. That's correct. Fear of rejection can allow you to take things personally. So because you feel the need to be accepted on a really high level, if in fact someone is saying no, or they're, like I said, constructive criticism, you got a little FOMO, all of those things, you take that as rejection. So let's roll that back up to the insecurity, right? So you have insecurities with that. And so with your insecurity, you automatically take that and the personalization bias. Now you think it's about you. Let me be very clear here. You are not everybody's priority. You should be your own priority. If in fact someone does not want to be around you, I do not care if it is a friend, if it is a parent, if it is a husband, if it is a daughter grown, do not ever think that A, they have to accept you, and B, that your worth is defined around that acceptance. I know you want mom to accept you. I know you want the husband to see it a certain way or the wife to see it certain ways. I understand, but there's this radical acceptance, right? Your fear of rejection, your rejection is linked to self-worth, right? Because if you didn't have a fear, when you get to the place of dealing in confidence and understanding that you're your priority, you don't really care. Like I don't carry a fear of rejection, right? Like I'm here for whoever wants to hear me. I work personally with whoever wants to work with me. If somebody goes, no, I don't want to. Well, okay. Like it doesn't affect me because you have that right. And so do the people around you. Just because you go above and beyond and you do all of these things, which goes into attachment, well, that's where we are. So you're sitting there and then you go into this fear of rejection. And then with the fear of rejection, you're like, oh my God, if I take criticism, that means that they can't stand me. I'm not doing a good enough job. So then you get defensive. So do you see how all this goes into play? You get defensive, but then you want to be included, but then you get individualized. And so it becomes a whole problematic thing. So you got to understand. See, when you understand some of the root causes, it brings self-awareness. Now, not everybody wants that, because in some ways, everybody wants it to be everybody else's fault. They want it to be your childhood's fault. You want it to be the narcissist's fault. You want it to be whatever fault. No, it's nobody's fault. Okay. It's not about fault and like pushing blame and all of that stuff. It's about owning the fact that not everybody has to have you as a friend or a sibling, even a sibling. You're related. You're related. Let's stop using the word family so loosely, right? Because family doesn't have to be somebody you're related to. So just remember that you do not have to be accepted. And if you aren't accepted, it does not mean that you are less than. Because if you're attaching the acceptance to one specific person or one group of people, you're literally saying they define me. Their desire to be around me or their desire to include me defines me. Why? Why would it? Just because you want to be there and they don't want you there has nothing to do with your value. But that's a whole different topic for a whole different day, right? Past experiences, right? You take things personally because the last time someone said that let's go back to that presentation, fictitious presentation. And, the boss or whoever says, is great. Now I would have expanded here and I'd like you to expand next time. Okay. That's very constructive. You immediately, consciously or subconsciously, go back to mom telling you, well, it's great that you got a 96. If you would have just studied, you missed one. Like, why'd you miss one? Right? So you take both of those criticisms and put them in the same pocket, and they are not. See, when you are triggered, when you feel what is not working for you, you run from it. And that is the opposite of what you do. You embrace those triggers. You run to the fire. You don't run from it. You have to get through it. You don't go around it. You don't go, oh God, I don't want to talk about my childhood. You're like, yeah, I'm at work. Like, why does my mom have anything to do with it? Because it does. Because you're taking the constructive criticism to the inability to reach some weird standard of perfectionism in your mom's mind. Okay. And when that happens, you immediately group everything into a generalization. Every time someone criticizes me, this is what it means. No, it does not. It's personalization bias again. It doesn't. People largely do things because that's where they are, their scope. That's us as humans. You do typically only see things from your perspective. That's why you have to put down your ego, jump into some emotional intelligence, heal your past traumas so you can view the world through a different lens other than the one that you're constantly seeing. So just because you've had that past experience about criticism, it doesn't mean that all criticism is attacking. Okay, so I know that goes into cognitive dissonance, which is also a podcast topic coming up, that goes into cognitive dissonance where you're having a hard time deciphering your beliefs with your actions and so it becomes a whole thing. So it confuses you. But that's what that is, right? So a lot of times you're taking things personally because you're like, well, the boss criticized me, so he feels the exact same, or they feel the exact same way as my mom did. Based on what fact? You don't know that. Now we're responding out of emotion again. And we know you do not respond out of emotion. That's reactions. You never respond out of emotion. You react out of emotion. Don't get that twisted. Okay, so that's extremely important. Now, cognitive distortions come into play here. Come into play quite heavy. So this is that overgeneralization, catastrophizing. Well, I know the boss said, I think and then you start negotiating yourself. Okay, he said it was good. I don't believe him. I think he was just trying to protect my feelings. Based on what fact? You have no facts to that. None whatsoever. Okay. Now, again, you're overreacting. Yeah, like you are overreacting, but you're overgeneralizing. And you're like, okay, well, this is what it means. This is what it means to him. And I know that he didn't really mean that it was good. He was trying to make me feel better by saying that it was good. But deep down inside, that's not really what he believes. That's not really what he believes. He was just saying that because he didn't want to hurt my feelings before he said anything else. And so that's the important part for you. See, again, not everybody is trying to come in hot for you. All right. So that's overgeneralization. Catastrophizing. Well, I guess he's going to take me off that project now. Yeah. I mean, I obviously didn't give enough information. So I know he's going to probably take me off based on what facts? Now, let's say Tiffany from HR says, hey, heads up. He's going to take you off this project. Okay, that's a fact. You can feel some kind of way. That also doesn't mean that you're not qualified or that you have no worth. That's not what that means. He takes you off the project because that might be what's best for the project. Now you internalize that and say, I suck, going back to imposter syndrome last week, I suck, and that's why he took me off of it. No, you just weren't qualified at that moment in time to do that on that level. Correct. And that you have to accept because once again, personalization bias, the world isn't about you. Your world should be about you. The world is not about you. So the overgeneralization, using words like this all the time, always, never, everybody, nobody, right? Those are generalization words. All right. So when you're generalizing things, it becomes a thing where you are always going to see it through that cognitive distorted lens. And just like the catastrophizing, when you're catastrophizing, you think that you are preparing yourself and you're not. Well, this is it. I guess this is it. I'm not going to have a job. And then he is going to tell everybody else in this field that I'm not good. So then I'm not going to have a job at all. What are you doing? We know, again, roll that back up to insecurity, fear of rejection, fear of lack. Now you're living in a space of lack, which I have a podcast coming on. So it's on lack. Now you're lacking. So now you think that everybody around you is out to get you. There will be people who will try to smear you. Correct. This is one person in a big old pond. And I know you're going to go, but it's my job. Then maybe that's not the job for you. I mean, that's straight up and down. All right. So you have to understand that those distortions do come into play. So when you catch yourself saying always, never, these people, those people, like you got to be careful of that because that overgeneralization is going to stop you and hinder you from a lot of things, like a lot of things. Okay. So now let's talk about your lack of regulation. I have a lot of information on various podcasts on emotional regulation. Okay. It takes staying present. It takes being honest. It takes self-awareness. And self-awareness, I'm going to go into the emotional regulation in a second, but I need you to understand about the self-awareness. If you find yourself getting defensive, right? Even if you're not saying it verbally and someone criticizes you in a positive way, but even though you can't see any, but let's say it is in a positive way and you don't say anything, but in your mind, you're like, well, okay. Well, but I'm good enough. Like you start negotiating in your head, imposter syndrome. And so what you have to remember is regulation is going to be up to you. This is why cognitively you got to work on it. Staying in the present space, staying in the right now, radical acceptance. These are all contributing factors to help you. Now, do some things make it harder? Sure. Autism can make it harder. ADHD can make it a little harder. Anxiety, depressions, bipolar, BPD. Sure. Is it impossible? It is not. You just have to be committed to work towards that a little bit more. And if that means not just therapy and coaching, if that also means medication, and then you're resistant in your mind to taking it because you're too worried about a side effect, which we know is anxiety about health, well, then if nothing changes, it stays the same, right? What you don't change, you choose. So some things you can't change, right? Remember that. Some things you're just like, damn, this sucks, but I can't change it. True, you can't. And it sucks that you can't change it. I agree. But what are you going to do? You got to accept it, right? So with the regulation, what happens is there's an impulsivity and like a lack of analysis that comes into play. So if someone typically says, let's go back to that. example, since we're using it, you finish the presentation, the boss says, yeah, everything was good except for the fact that hey, and the next time I'd like for you to expand on this. Now you have no analyzation. You go straight out of impulsive reaction, not response, reaction. And you're like, okay, well, I understand, but that's all the information that I had. Okay. Whoa. Impulsivity will always lead to defensiveness, right? Because you're coming in hot and you're trying to make the person see that you did the best you could. They don't have to see it. They said that it was good. You don't believe them. Just because you don't believe that they said everything was good and, you just could expand here, just because you can't see that doesn't mean that you need to come in hot. No one is going to listen to you when you are in defense mode, because I know I won't. You will not get listened to. Now, in my profession, it's a little bit different, right? Because most people really aren't defensive when they come to me because they really want to get through like that stuckness or get through the defensiveness or the victim mentality. So it's not as problematic. But even in my personal world, I'm done. I'm good. Like, you're going to be defensive. Fine. You win. 2 + 2 is 8. Now I know where to put you and I'm not going to deal with it anymore. But that's going to come with emotional regulation. I'm not going to get reactive based on your defensiveness. So your impulsivity with your lack of emotional awareness, right, which is your emotional regulation, you are instantly just lashing out or reacting, not responding, on emotions, right? No facts. You're not even analyzing it. You're not humbling yourself and putting your ego in check and saying, oh, you know what? I probably really could have expanded on that. And now that gives me an opportunity to expand further. I'll use me as an example, what I just said. There's an entire podcast next week on personalization bias. If I was doing this presentation and I was doing all of this is why you see me spending more time on it. Well, if I just said personalization bias is thinking about everything is about you always, and I just moved on, you'd be like, okay, well, I get that, but why? Like, now you start having questions. And then you come to me and you say, my boss, me, whatever, whomever comes and says, hey, do you think that you could expand on that? Like, I really like that podcast, but I really want to know more about personalization bias. Like, I would love to know more. Great. Oh my God. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. What do you need? Got you. I'm not going to go, well, I just didn't. Like, why would I do that? You will never grow if you can't hear it. If you take it personally, then that's on you. It's not on them. So your regulation, so that's why you want to work on consistencies, self-esteem. We're going to talk about consistencies and all of that in the cognitive dissonance one, which is down the road. But it's kind of important because that's where self-discipline comes into play. And your brat self has to go. We all have an inner brat, and that has to go on the wayside, right? Approval desire. So anytime that you're insecure, you are trying to get approval and validation. So the moment someone criticizes or puts something up or doesn't return a text or whatever the case may be, in your mind, it threatens that approval. It puts it in your head. Now, mind you, there's no facts to this. None. It's how you feel. Okay. And we know feelings aren't facts. But so you're looking for the approval set and you're looking for that. And so when someone where you feel you disappointed somebody or you did all of those things, now you feel threatened to be approved. In turn, guess what can happen? You can get defensive. You can just distance and ghost out from relationships because you're like, well, that's fine. I'll just beat them to the punch. There's a lot that comes into play because you make it personal. You do not have to be invited to everything. They do not have to do things as you would. Those expectations do not have to be met. You should not be setting those kinds of expectations. So what it does, but I want you to be clear as to why sometimes you're taking things personal, is again, you feel lack of approval, which we know goes into personalization bias, as well as insecurity and everything else that we've talked about. That's why I'm kind of putting them in this order. You can have them in any order. It doesn't have to unfold like this, but I just want you to be fully aware of that, And then of course, some things could just honestly just be a miscommunication. Like, because very often people, and I have a podcast on this too. I know everything we talk about, I'm like, more is coming. Active listening. People don't active listen. They listen for the break of their communication, the other person's conversation, so they can jump in because they've already they've already formulated a response. They've already thought things from their perspective. So they're willing. Now listen, ADHD people and people who are high strung like that, like myself, it's real easy to jump in. So it's a cognitive thing to be aware of, because it's not just about it being rude. It's about, you're not going to be able to actively listen. So then if you're not actively listening, you're going to make assumptions. Now you made assumptions based on the fact that you're taking everything personal. And it's something that I'm talking about next week. But, it's like if you send somebody a message and they don't respond right away. Okay, maybe they're doing something. Nope, in your head, oh, are they mad at me? Oh my God, are they trying to punish me? No, they're in the pool, or they're in the shower, or they're at the gym, or maybe they're hunting if they're hunters. They're doing something that does not have to do with you. Not everything is meant to be about you. And again, if in fact you're dealing with someone who is passive aggressive and they don't know how to communicate what it is that they're trying to say to you, why would you take that personal? That has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. Right? Are there going to be people who vague post because they don't have the guts or the balls to say to you, hey, this is how I feel? And so, it's kind of like when people go, oh, well, they know who they are. And okay, why are you putting that on Facebook? You're looking for attention. That's attention seeking. All right. So sometimes taking things personal also goes into attention seeking, because now if you've taken it personal, now you are reaching out to the person, which is great. Like, hey, this is how I felt. I statements. I how I felt, da, 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 da. And then they say, no, I'm so sorry. Like, that's not at all how I meant it. And now you still internalize it because you're looking for that attention, right? You're looking for that consciously or subconsciously. So when you understand why you take things personal, understand that there's usually 99% of the time, 0.9, always a deeper rooted issue than why you're taking it personal. And we're going to talk about how you can start switching that mindset on Patreon right now. But I just need you to understand it. So when you understand why you're taking it personal, you give yourself a little bit more empathy, right? You don't live in a victim state and be like, well, it's just who I am. We're not doing that. But it is okay to say, oh, okay, man, I'm really working on my insecurities. Like, oh, and you don't run from it. You don't try to make excuses. You don't get defensive. Like, well, but I'm trying. Like, okay, calm down. Okay. Not everything needs an instantaneous reaction. And until you can pull back and get a bird's eye view of it, you're always going to be reacting and not responding. So that's why it is up to you to take the awareness of this, right? Because if you were listening to this in the car, cleaning, whatever you're doing, if you're listening to this and you immediately go, well, that sounds like my mother. God, that sounds like this person. Okay, cool. Love that you can identify that. Don't judge it. And then check yourself. Are any of these things me? If somebody posts something on Facebook that's close to me and I saw them out with other friends and they post this meme about keeping their circle small and I wasn't included, why am I taking that on personally? And even if I was uncluded, and they didn't tell me, then they don't have the balls to tell me anyway. So why do I care about it anyway? Because your worth is not defined by that. So when you get clear in that space, it's going to become much, much easier for you to actually not take things personal. And if somebody says, hey, you know what? My feelings were hurt when you did A, B, C, D, and E, be willing to hear the criticism and also be willing to stand your ground. If how they took it is how they took it. It's not your responsibility to worry about how people perceive things. And so if that's the case and you feel sorry, you're sorry that they feel that way, you can say that. If you're not, that's okay too. But if they take that personally, if they go, can you believe that they just said that they're sorry? I feel that way. They didn't even say sorry because they don't feel it. Like, why do you want somebody to say sorry to you if they don't mean it? I know you might think they should be because you're personalizing everything, which goes into personalization bias, which is next week. And so you'll kind of see how all these things kind of align, right? Your imposter syndrome, your insecurities, you're taking things personal, your personalization bias, like everything is always entwined. It's not ever really standalone. Okay. So with that being said, we're going to jump over to Patreon. We're going to start, I'm going to kind of go through on like how you can really start to work on it. And yeah, we'll go from there. But I promise you, just because people don't have the guts to tell you how they feel or what they're thinking has nothing to do with your worth or your value. And if they can't tell you and be straight up and down with you, then you know what? They're dealing with something on their own. Don't try to make it make sense, because you know what? It's not gonna. So don't take it personal. Check it out.